Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Metaverse Podcast. I am Rumi Morales. I am a partner and board member at Outlier, and it's such a pleasure to welcome to the podcast today Maja Vujinovic, who is managing director of OGroup, and Marc Baumann, who's founder at FiftyOne Ventures. We're here today to discuss brands and Web3. If you're anything like me, you may have been excited not too long ago when it seemed like there were so many consumer brands exploring Web3, engaging with new audiences. But perhaps you've seen some of the headlines recently where we've seen some of these companies pause or even drop out of this field altogether. Maja and Marc are going to talk through this, explain why those who have stayed will be successful. We'll talk about some of the challenges, perhaps of those who've stepped back a little bit, the challenges they've faced, but the reasons why new technologies in conjunction with blockchain, technologies like machine learning, for example, can really uncover new opportunities and possibilities for growth, particularly in economies or markets that might be underrepresented in the blockchain space, Web3 space, and the overall brand space. But we know that that's where the future economic opportunity resides. So very excited to welcome Maja and Marc here today. Let's get started. Maja and Marc, it's so good to see the both of you. I'm so thrilled to have you on the Metaverse Podcast.
It's good to be here. Thank you for having us.
Likewise, great to be here.
And Maja, I have to say, it's kind of surprises me because as I was reading so much about you preparing for this, I realized that you and I have been female executives in the blockchain space for a decade, and yet this is the first time we've ever had the chance to speak with each other, which is a little crazy. So can you just share a little bit about your journey and how you got into Web3?
Yeah, absolutely. And I forgot to mention, you have a perfect voice for podcasts. So I think this is going to be enjoyable. My background really quickly, I'm a lawyer by trade. I went off to do mobile payments in Africa, early 2000s. I was part of that mobile payment revolution, got in touch with a lot of gamers there because a lot of them were kicked off from PayPal. Ended up doing mobile payments in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And then in 2010, I got into Bitcoin. And 2013, acquired the first bank for Tether. And then went into GE. As we all knew, in 2013, we still didn't know where blockchain industry is going to go. I was the youngest CIO at General Electric and really initiated the whole blockchain innovation and then a combination of machine learning and blockchain. I kept one foot in crypto fully. I'm an investor in a lot of different funds in this space and direct deals as well. Was on a board of CoinDesk for a while, but then also kept another foot in the corporates and corporate world and asset management and family offices. And today, OGroup works with $4 billion of family offices. And we have an operational arm that helps startups grow and scale, particularly integrate into larger companies. And so that's a little bit about me. And Marc?
I entered crypto in 2017 started working for Bitcoin Swiss. Bitcoin Swiss was one of the...
Marc, you're like a baby compared to Maja if she first got into Bitcoin in 2010. Although,
yeah, I know.
7 years in crypto is a long time. I'll give you that if you came in 2017.
Yeah, for many of us, this was the second wave coming into crypto, and we already feel old now. But when Maja entered the space, obviously much, much earlier. But I came in 2017, started working for Bitcoin Swiss. Bitcoin Swiss was one of the early and biggest crypto financial service providers in Europe. I was the head of marketing there for 4.5 years. Then at the end of 2022, founded FiftyOne Ventures, started working with a lot of technology startups, building technology for consumer brands, building blockchain-based consumer engagement applications, help them grow, help them scale, help them position themselves, started working with consumer brands on the other side, and started doing a lot of research as well on the Web3 consumer space, and became one of the top opinion leaders in that field.
That's terrific. And it's wonderful to have you back on the podcast. I believe you were with us earlier talking about how Web3 is changing the game for consumer brands. That was a podcast that you did with Jamie at Outlier back in early January. So it's wonderful to have you both. And I'm excited to dig into what you're working on together. I will say though, Maja, you mentioned when you were the CIO at GE, that means Chief Innovation Officer, right? And no doubt you've seen a lot about different enterprises in this space and could probably talk a lot, everything, from energy to supply chains to what have you. But I would like to dig in a little bit more on the consumer brand side here on Web3. I think that's something that you both are also interested to talk about. If I can just share a little bit about my own personal story here, I did a lot with blockchain, but it was always on the financial institution side. And I've been banging my head on the wall for like years and years and years, and finally came to a point not too long ago. I'm like, you know what? Maybe financial institutions will never get it. But it's the brands, right? It's the consumer-facing brands that need to innovate. And I got so excited when so many of them started to get into things like NFTs and whatnot. But I feel like we've kind of reached an inflection point now where some brands are starting to walk away. Starbucks, for example, recently stopped their loyalty program in Web3, kind of hurt my heart a little bit. So I was wondering, Maja, if you wanted to, or Marc, either who wants to take this one first, but just wondering, like, why did Starbucks stop? And what other brands are kind of similarly changing their approach these days?
We can start with some facts. And I think that the first obvious fact is that we looked at this, about 50% of Interbrand's global top 100 brands have entered the space in the last 3 years. And entered the space means they launched NFT activations. About 50%. And if you look at how many of them are left, I would say it's maybe 2 handful of them that are still actively pursuing that doubled down on it. And some of the most prominent brands left the space. You just mentioned Starbucks. Nike is another one. Nike announced earlier this year that they're going to reshift their focus for their digital efforts. Reddit stopped their digital collectibles program. So a lot of prominent names out there that left.
I would even give it a little bit of a twist here, Rumi. I would challenge and say that maybe you only have about 5 to 7 brands today that are actually serious about this. And I can give perspective for 2 reasons. One, when the NFT, as you said, was, the concept of NFT was booming with these corporates, I actually saw that most of them are going to hit a wall within, because NFT as a concept is phenomenal, but it wasn't ripe for corporates and wasn't ripe for full-scale involvement of consumers. And there are a number of reasons why technology is not mature, UX, UI is not mature, which we'll talk about as well. But I think there's another aspect of corporates which is really powerful, that being somebody who wasn't a corporate and who wasn't very corporate. I wasn't very corporate personality. I was an entrepreneur in emerging markets. And what I realized is that it's a huge educational gap of the corporate executives and the new innovative technologies. And so, yes, corporates went for it, but I actually think that it takes a long time to educate executives for them to put this on their agenda and care about, to see a full kind of fledged expression of this technology. And so I think there's only about 5 to 7 companies at the moment that are really devoting large budgets. And this is, by the way, why we exist today, is because we are focused on a kind of full-scale process of what they could be doing, not just in blockchain, but also in machine learning and, AR, VR and everything else.
To add to that, and what you've now seen over the last month is that a lot of these brands have realized just exactly what Maja said, that this is not only about NFTs, but they need to look at it much more broadly. What we see now in talking with brands is that a lot of them are interested in gaming. A lot of them want to build on Roblox. Gaming is almost like the second NFT hype. If you look at the numbers again, about 80% of Interbrand's top 100 global brands have launched immersive commerce activations. This could be either a commerce experience in a virtual world. This could be a gaming experience in Roblox. So a lot of them are doing that again. And they're doing that for a reason, because a lot of those next-gen consumers are present in that space. They spend hours per day on those platforms. If you look at Roblox, about 2.6 hours per day on average per user. And Roblox has about 70 million monthly active users. And we see that and hear that from brands. Their top priority is activating the next generation of consumers. And that's what they try.
And just one last fact, I think, Rumi, just before you move, because I think this is important for viewers to understand, or even the brands listening, why we started a new vertical between OGroup and FiftyOne Ventures is because we're in crypto, right? I don't think that crypto is going away. I felt that way since 2010. And particularly, I think this is important to mention. The only reason I realized that crypto is going to go places because myself, I was affected as a child of coming from a country where, you weren't as free to use, certain things as you are in the Western world. And then living and working in Africa and Latin America, I saw an enormous amount of mobile power. So the mobile revolution, as you know very well, in places like Asia and Latin America and Africa, it's just leapfrogged. And so kids were able to take the phone and see what you and I were doing in the US. And they wanted to have the same experience. They wanted to have same things. It's impossible to have it in the current financial system. It's impossible to have that financial freedom. And so I think that crypto brings that. And that was one of the reasons why I jumped in. And it's one of the also reasons that you're seeing enormous amount of youth coming out of these markets. And that's another reason why you're seeing Asia drive a lot of the adoption in crypto market too, because they've seen their previous generation of their parents be really suppressed by certain regimes. And now that they have this freedom, they want to express themselves. And so what Marc and I looked at is when we talk to brands, they don't spend a lot of time on this, right? And we'll again talk about that consumer experience, but we are realizing that, today, just on Ethereum addresses, you have 350 million unique Ethereum addresses. And let's just say that let's take a margin of 20% less than that, right? Let's just cut off 20%. That's still a very large number. And the last stat is that just in the US, if you look at it, 40% of Americans own crypto. That is about 90 million people. And that's not stopping, right? And so when you look at all those stats that we've just given you, I mean, we would be crazy not to take advantage of this opportunities and brands not to take advantage of this opportunity.
Right. You are saying all of the correct things for sure. But let's kind of unpack or dig a little bit deeper on some of the sections that you mentioned. The first was around the fact that you just have a handful of those first innovators, experimenters that went in that are left. You said that education was one of the reasons that perhaps some of them pulled out, or that to get more in, education is part of it. Is that the primary reason that those that have stayed, the 5 to 6, is it education? Or do they have a broader awareness, perhaps of some other external factors of reasons to stay in? I'm curious because as someone who has struggled personally within a large corporation, shouting about blockchain or Web3 and everyone should get into it and being told no, to find those enterprises that stay in beyond education, what has kept these brands in this game despite the volatility or uncertainty in this space?
I think maybe I could start here, Marc. And you and I have kind of seen these corporates, and as you said, been probably kicked out of the rooms. I mean, I was kicked out of a room 3 times before they actually took me in seriously. And we developed the architecture on Predix, and we started really looking at everything from customer engagement to, turbines. I mean, it's just everything from industrial to retail. And I think part of the reason why some stays, I think it's a combination of things, and you are right. One, you have somebody as resilient as I was and kept coming back and saying, no, this is the future, and showcasing how this actually impacts the EBITDA or your customers and et cetera. Second is because some of these executives are extremely educated and they realize all those stats that we've given you in terms of the growth, and that what Marc mentioned in terms of the younger users just living in a digital world. And that's a fact, right? That's not us making this up or anything like that. The other reason is because they've actually taken the time to really understand how blockchain could potentially replace the legacy systems. And particular combination of machine learning and getting the data off the edge, which is your customer, and looping that in is extremely powerful than kind of bringing it the other way around, which is bringing the data in and having all the dirty pools of data and sifting through that. And so the third part of it is that I think that there's something that I've argued in one of Marc's articles, is that the consumer is getting more educated, even though they're still not educated as much as some would like. They're getting more educated and they're realizing, hey, I create data. I'm the walking data. And so I think brands are seeing that consumers are being educated, and they're saying, wait a second, consumers actually want something back. We can't just give them 10% or 20% discount one time and expect loyalty for life, right? And so that has to grow. It has to grow in much more significant ways than what we have today.
Right. And then, Marc, you were talking about gaming in particular. Is there something about the gaming consumer or the Roblox player that is making this a particularly interesting universe that's adopting this and that brands want to work with?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, maybe to add to what Maja just said as well, is that I think that the brands who stay behind now or stay in the space, they recognize that, this is much more than just releasing an NFT collection. And they've approached that space from the beginning much more holistically and with a broader vision, and maybe also with an understanding that this might shift parts of their business model and value creation. So you've seen brands that just released NFT collections, and those NFT collections were dropped by their marketing departments without being entangled with their broader brand ecosystem. And now those NFT collections don't create any engagement, and they cost a lot of money, and they didn't create any revenue. And now they're kind of retreating and think, that was maybe all a fad. But if you look at this more holistically, then I think it makes more sense. And that's the brands you see now stay behind. And staying behind means also they recognize that this is not only about NFTs, but as you just said or mentioned, gaming as well. There are a lot of technologies that are now flowing together. Maja mentioned machine learning and data. We have gaming, we have generative AI and user-generated content. We have tokenization, which starts connecting physical and digital products of those brands. And those brands that stay, they realize that those technologies are merging, and they can create a much, much more powerful experience by combining them.
Right. And I would love to dig into your thoughts on those technologies. Certainly at Outlier, we've always been talking about convergence since the early days. The fact that there's no technology that exists in isolation, and the combination, right, of AI and blockchain and IoT and others is really, really such a powerful view of a potential future for all of us. But before I do that, you both dropped a little bit about this collaboration or this partnership that OGroup and FiftyOne Ventures is doing together. I want to make sure that we all who are watching and listening fully appreciate and understand what you both are up to together. So would love to hear more about this in detail.
So the way it came about, and the reason why we're a little bit hesitating, because there are 4 or 5 very large brands that we're working with. They're big names, and we simply saw 3 things. Number one, we saw this piece where brands were approaching Marc, brands were approaching me, and they were approaching us for 2 different reasons. Marc, because he's got a big following, he's been writing about this, and he's congregating all this incredible data. And they were just saying, hey, give us your data, give us your insights. We need to understand how this works. Where are we going? From my side, because of my corporate background, they're saying, wait, how do we integrate these blockchains? What is the best L1? Who are the best partners, right? They saw that I've been investing for a while. I'm an LP in many funds. And they kept coming to us for 2 different reasons. And we kept saying, wait a second, we can combine this because we actually, and as we kind of noodled on this for the last couple of months, we potentially came up with a product that is in data analytics. And we kind of do see that as on-chain data grows, there will be huge opportunities where we can help these brands really save costs on marketing and user acquisition. And when we then ended up speaking to a lot of data analytics firms and or on-chain analytics platforms in crypto, we realized that their model was really siloed in crypto, but they were leaving this massive opportunity of brands who were thirsty for their data. And so we kind of came up with this product that we cannot reveal yet, but we're really working with brands on 3 things. As I said, 1, education and helping them educate. One of the biggest brands in the world at the moment has approached us right now to help them just educate executives internally. And the reason why they see us as a good arm, 1, because Marc has a huge research arm on this, and they do very in-depth case studies. And 2, I have practical applications, so really what it means to develop a blockchain as a service, what it means to really do that internally, what kind of political things you have to, play internally to do that, and how do you really approach it? What is the innovation sandbox internally, right? Do you actually have to do it in a corporate way, or can you do it in a better way? The second thing that we do with them is they'll come to us with the product and they'll say, hey, we're building on Roblox. Now we need your help figuring out how do we get this out there? Who are the types of users? And then how do we translate this to those that are non-blockchain native users, right? And then a third way is that we are combining other aspects, as we've talked about, other tooling, and we are helping them create actual products that they either can white label or that we can develop with them.
You have certainly whetted my appetite to learn more. To continue divulge all this awesomeness that you're both up to. I have to ask though, I mean, no two companies are alike, as we know. No two Web3 strategies are the same. So how does your advice to companies kind of differ, with regards to their very specific approach? Brands are very unique. People spend so much time and attention trying to foster their brand. And so obviously, I'm just curious how you approach different companies, or without divulging any names, of course, but how do you help them with their strategies in this regard?
Mm-hmm. Also, as Maja just said, we don't just try to push a blockchain solution. We look at this very holistically. We listen first. We listen to what problems they want to solve. We help them filter out the noise, and we recommend them the best partners, and we help them build that out. So this is what we do. And a lot of those companies are at different stages. They look at different things. Some of them are big on tokenization. Some of them have a loyalty program that they want to bring to the next level and into Web3. Some of them have a strong community and are thinking about how can they incentivize that more effectively. Some of them want to build games. Some of them maybe want to tap into data much more. And we help them to kind of take a step back and look at this more holistically and say, look, this is great, but how can you now start thinking about those other verticals, and how can you start combining them into a much more powerful solution?
One more thing maybe that I completely killed Marc's ear and a few others with is meme coin, concept of meme coins. I think most people, as you probably know, Rumi, most people have looked at meme coins in a negative light. Months ago, because I was part of first ICOs, and then ICOs is kind of like a meme coin, right? And then we saw Dogecoin as a massive meme coin that Elon Musk shilled. And then we saw Shiba Inu, right? So all of these zealous communities forming, and then you started to see this wave of meme coins happening. I actually started to separate noise from reality, and I started to say, what is so interesting about these meme coins? And interestingly, and on your question, we have had a question around meme coins, and we have gone to brands and say, maybe you should really look at these communities. So it's not the way that usually you would think, which is, okay, here's a technology, let us take the technology and figure out how we engage with the customer. Instead, I've told the brands, do it the other way around. Look what these customers or your potential customers or current customers are doing, right? They're buying into these meme coins. And why meme coins for me have been interesting is a method of self-organizing. I mean, if you actually look through what these meme coins have been able to do in these communities, they basically have disregarded VCs, they've disregarded angel investing, they've gone to nobody, and they've self-organized. They self-organize to create something they want to create and belong to. Sure, a lot of them have done it as a means to an end, just get money and get out. But we see that in traditional finance too. We see it in trading strategies. We see it in everything. But there's something more powerful happening here, which is part of the reason why I'm in crypto, which is to say these communities are self-organizing to say, we have an idea. We want to contribute to everybody, and we want this to add value, whatever that value they define. And we're going to fund this ourselves. And in the process of that, we're going to earn a lot of money. And so I think that brands should really take a look at that self-organization of communities and just say, okay, well, how do we tap into power of these communities? How do we actually work with them? How do we build with them? How do we actually now go in and bring our culture of a brand into these communities and collaborate with them? So I think that's another really powerful way that we've been engaging with brands as well, is opening their minds to this.
In a way, you could almost say like those meme coins are NFTs 2.0 because they are much more open, they are much more liquid. Instead of just being 10,000 or limited to 1,000 NFT holders, everyone can participate in them. That's also why those community dynamics and incentives are much stronger, which makes it extremely interesting for brands.
That's a very, very important point. Very important points that both of you have made. Yes, you can look at Dogecoin and from a financial perspective, be like, that thing has a market cap of, I think it's like $24 billion today. But at the same time, it's the community aspect of it, right? There's a community that's been keeping that as one of the most popular cryptocurrencies for years now. And I think we saw this with DAOs as well. When, I like to think of that Constitution DAO that came together to buy the US Constitution, which I thought was fantastic because it was the community being able to utilize this technology to be able to demonstrate a value, to demonstrate a purpose. And if brands are able to recognize that, it's like, wow, you don't have to do everything on your side and force it on audience. If the audience is already signaling to you how excited they are about something.
Yeah, and Rumi, that's it. I think I couldn't have said it any better. To just add on that now, there's another thing that we're actually going to be writing an article on the moment, just potentially on meme coins, but adding other things. There's another thing that I bring up in a lot of my presentations, which is this massive shift that's happening, which is this democratization of access to capital in general. And then the schizophrenic behavior of our society that we want things yesterday. We want things today. We want it when we want it. And we have applied this short-term thinking for good or bad. That's a different podcast. But reality is that is happening, right? We have digitalization. We have flow of information that is it's unprecedented rates. We have acceleration of technology and life, which also drives acceleration of our life. If we're engaged in that, sure. If we are living somewhere in a village and we're not in touch with these technologies, then your life is much slower. But that is a concept that has been written about quite a lot. And what's fascinating is that think of your own schedule, right? We're living constantly on inputs. Right. And so what do you want with all of those inputs? You want some kind of a benefit, right? And so if a lot of people that are in touch with technology now that can suddenly allow them to express themselves and make money by them expressing themselves, they want those benefits. And so we're living in the times that, as I call schizophrenic kind of behavior of short-term thinking, is that we want quick gratification today. Is that good or bad? Again, another podcast, but I think it's really interesting to kind of pay attention to these fast self-organizing communities that can drive the market. And the reason why I say that is because they're nudging VCs and they are involving hedge funds, because hedge funds are seeing an opportunity to do a lot of trading in these volatile markets, not just in meme coins, but in Bitcoin and Ethereum and, everything else. And so that we can't disregard that. I think it's a big part of what's happening in crypto.
Absolutely. Kind of a selfish plug here, but I live in Chicago, and it was actually the hedge fund guys, the prop traders that got into this space very, very early and have built an interesting community here. But they also, beyond just trading it, I think they do see more than that, the value, and they've become investors as well in the space from a venture capital perspective because of the broader opportunities that I think we recognize here. I'm going to circle back on the technology point. Way back earlier when we're starting our chat here, Maja, you mentioned UI UX as kind of I don't want to say a sore point, but obviously, work can be done there. So from a technology standpoint, if you look at the challenges, but also the opportunities around machine learning and generative AI and stuff like what's going to be fixed and what do you think is really going to change the way brands are going to be interacting in Web3 as it relates to these other technologies that we have coming in?
Yeah, so in terms of machine learning, we already know that predictive AI can basically analyze consumer behavior and, predict the market and user behavior and actions and certain type of actions, right? I mean, to the detail, right? You could move or add a loyalty tier. You can decrease number of points. You could modify specific campaigns. I mean, we are getting really some capabilities that are extremely specific. And so you could almost segment every person by its behavior and group them, by lots of different things. And so when I talk about UX, or when we think about UX UI, let's be honest, blockchain technology nor its builders are there yet. This is still a new tech. This is still a new way of approaching things. And we can expect a new technology that has been around. Well, blockchain has been around since late 80s, right? But the other parts of homomorphic encryption and a bunch of other tools that fill into that technology haven't. And so, number one, what I think brands should do is simply lose the word blockchain. They really shouldn't be talking about blockchain when they're engaging the consumers. They shouldn't be talking about, okay, we're using blockchain technology to engage you. We are doing machine learning to XYZ, right? I think it may confuse a lot of people. And I think on the other hand, when I see builders, a lot of builders in Web3 are really young devs. They don't have decades of experience of building UX UI. Well, number one, technology is not there to develop this really easy. And number two, these devs don't have that experience yet. But I think within the next 2 years, that's my prediction, we're going to start to see some really cool apps that are going to be also for non-blockchain users, because people are just simply not going to talk about blockchain. I mean, early on in 2015, I even used to tell companies when they come in front of me and pitch blockchain idea, I would say, can you pitch me that idea without using a blockchain word? Right? And if it doesn't solve anything, then you probably don't need it. And so I think that you're going to start to see next 2 years, a lot of these devs come up with some pretty cool stuff for people to use that are not native to blockchain. So that's interesting.
That also, the same goes for the ones who actually built that technology. And that's something I see with a lot of tech startups I work with or see in the market, that they approach those brands from a technology perspective. Hey, we have that part of the technology that covers that part of the value chain of a Web3 activation. And those brands don't even know yet what kind of Web3 strategy they have. Instead of focusing on technology, they also, the builders need to have a more holistic approach and start with brands from the beginning and the strategy and like what this is all about instead of going first with technology.
Yeah, and you see a lot of builders build a tool and then they just expect a corporate to say, yes, we need it, right? But again, a lot of the builders in the space are very young, who've never worked in a corporate, who've never worked in business to begin with, right? And we're going to start to see that in the next, this end of this year, a year after, we're going to start to see some consolidation in this space, because a lot of the companies have raised a lot of money. They might not need to consolidate or be acquired or whatever. But there are other challenges, right? There's the challenges of interoperability. There is scaling. There's privacy. I mean, there's all kinds of challenges, yeah. I think, in this space.
Yeah, there sure are. There sure are. I do agree with you. I think 2 years might be hopeful. But I like hope in there. I also find it interesting how you encourage them not to use the word blockchain. And in my head, when you just said that, it reminded me of that movie with Sandra Bullock called The Net. And it came out, the internet was getting popular, like, oh my gosh, the internet, the net. We used to actually say that. We don't anymore. That all being said, we're talking about brands. We haven't really talked about kind of communication strategies, though. And I'm kind of curious, or maybe I should say, we've been talking about this in the brands in the context of people who are already building in Web3. But how do brands reach out to like non-blockchain people if they are already then themselves wanting to go into Web3, right? So with all those non-native users, my father, my brother, other people included, how should brands deciding to embrace Web3 not also kind of lose their core audience or get them along for the ride to start to participate?
Yeah, maybe it's interesting here to talk a little bit about the Starbucks example, because Starbucks is maybe exactly the opposite how you should not do it. And this helps us understand how you should do it, and not a company who's doing it quite well, or actually the first one who starts rolling out their Web3 strategy to the whole customer base is Hugo Boss. They just announced it 2 weeks ago. They integrated Web3 into their loyalty strategy for all consumers. But up to now, all brands experimented on the side. They kept it separate. Lacoste had a huge activation. They kept it separate. Starbucks did a huge activation. They kept it separate. But diving into Starbucks now. So what Starbucks did, they launched that Starbucks Odyssey program beginning of last year. It lasted for about a year. Beginning of that year, they announced they're going to end it. Starbucks Odyssey was a separate experience. People could collect stamps based on the coffees they bought. They collect those stamps. They could experience certain branded journeys. They could trade those stamps. So it was all around collecting unique stamps, Starbucks branded stamps. But that was only for a small subset of their customer base, because most people didn't care about that. And even those who cared about it, it didn't actually create enough value for them to keep like using that program, and it didn't actually generate any revenue for Starbucks either. We calculated that Starbucks, that's publicly known now, received 4 million from Polygon to launch this program, so they probably didn't have to pay anything for that. They generated about 1 million in revenue in the first year out of stamp sales and trading fees, and they probably had to hire a team of several people to run that program, so they probably broke even. So the outcome for Starbucks was minuscule. Even if you scale that to maybe, 5 or 10% of their customer base, it wouldn't actually add anything to their bottom line. And there's a bigger picture behind that. And maybe you, Maja, you can dive into that a little bit.
One of the things that I've talked about is when I looked at just engagement of customers in general and what does a benefit mean? I think it's really hard to decipher that. And the reason why is because we're humans and our needs and what we consider a benefit changes. We might think that getting, 1,000 miles per year is okay from an airline, right? But if you start traveling more and if they're just giving you 1,000, even you starting to travel more, you may want to reconsider that or might start caring less or, we really do change. You're dealing with human nature. But there's one thing for certain. I think in Starbucks' case, what I've argued in this article is that really Starbucks, if you think about it, is running a bank. They take the things on your card and they take all the loyalty points and they loan against that. And they loan in billions. They don't loan in $100,000 or $200,000. So that means they're using your capital to do that. And what do you get? One cup of coffee, right? And so I think this is really something that if consumers were educated more of how their data is being used, I think they would demand more benefits. And so when we work with brands, we start holistically, Rumi, and we say, okay, your customer experience, be it that it's physical or digital, it really doesn't matter, has to start with complete understanding of your customer. So from start to finish. And unfortunately, a lot of times we will get a question of what technologies can we use to speed this up? And that we'll say, okay, here's the tech, but let's really understand the journey of your customer, right? And when you really better understand your customer, it gives you an ability to connect with them on much, much deeper level and in much smaller ways. And I think this is what we're getting into in the next 5 years with AI and blockchain. That AI and blockchain is going to give us the capability to really understand a customer in the smallest ways. And I would say that's where the benefits are going to come from, is really dissecting of where those customers are and segmenting that and really trying to then provide real, not just short-term benefits. By the way, some business cases or some brands or some goods, you may just need short-term benefits, right? And that's it. But some of them may need longer-term benefits. And for that, you really do need to demonstrate your understanding of a customer.
I fully agree on that, Maja. And I would even add that I think some of the brands will go through a mindset shift that means they have to change their business model and change how they think about value for consumers, about giving back value to consumers, about ownership incentives. And that could materialize. For example, we see the first games popping up now that brands are playing around with, that you don't spend money on marketing and advertisements in the hope you convert a small subset of that to paying customers, but you actually incentivize your customers directly by giving them money to play, to engage, and bring them into your flywheel. So that's a big mindset shift that intermediates or disintermediates platforms, advertising platforms, establishes a much more direct relationship to your consumers, but it also requires a shift in how you do marketing and business.
Well, in some of the closing minutes we have left, if it's okay, you really touched me earlier in this conversation when you started to talk about kind of your personal experience, freedom, the opportunities here for users in different parts of the world, perhaps, to achieve something with this technology and through these opportunities. I don't really have a question, but I just wanted you to riff on that a little bit more for others who can likewise be inspired by your journey and the opportunities that are ahead for them.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I don't really share my personal experience too much. I have for raising money for unprivileged around the world for different use cases. I have done that because I've been on the kind of receiving end of the aid as a child, and I saw the issues of centralized systems personally. I do think as a professional that was in private equity in Africa and Latin America and Asia, if you think about the generation today, right, they're much better off. Some would argue not, but let's just say they're much better off than what their predecessors were with parents and grandparents. And a lot of places in Asia, if you look at the market that's actually really high in usage of crypto, I mean, they've seen a lot of regimes who have suppressed them, who were not able to, those parents were not able to get loans. Those parents were not able to go and get financing. Those people were not able to get paid even in a ways that would not, take half of their paycheck. You can't even send money to people now, without them getting only 60% of what you've sent, right? And so I've long ago, Rumi, called a killer use case the crypto stablecoins. And this was, again, 2014, 15, I've called stablecoins a killer use case of crypto because they really are incredible tool for people in emerging markets to do business and to survive and to live. And so I do think this is part of the reason a lot of people are in crypto early on. This is certainly part of the reason why a lot of Bitcoin core was in crypto. This is part of the reason why Ethereum has boomed, because they realized through smart contracts, I can just create something and three of us could create something without a central authority. And we can run a business without anybody being in the middle, right? And we can decide our rules of the game. And that's extremely powerful. Of course, it comes with its challenges and etc. But I do think that it has created enormous amount of wealth for people in emerging markets. And I do think that with the power of a phone and the power of a smart contract, I think we're going to see this next generation just boom in these markets and educate themselves much faster. I do fear one thing. I do fear AI in this. And the reason why I say that is because I do see that some countries are going to go really far in terms of education and capabilities and giving their citizens tools to use big, crypto and AI. And some countries are simply not going to be there yet. And that's something else that I'm focused on OGroup, but we are definitely working with governments around the world and wealthy family offices in those markets that want to actually give back and want to educate and want to provide tools for the, let's say bottom half of the society to be onboarded to a financial system.
Now, thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
And I do think it's important for brands that may be listening to us right now. Again, yes, there's an opportunity with your current audience, or there could be an opportunity with another, crypto native audience. But if we think about the longer term, larger opportunities amongst untapped audiences globally, for those of us who've been in the space for a while, we've been waiting, but I think we've been waiting for a good reason, because there is truly, truly structural and societal positive change that's possible here, and a whole bunch of new generation of consumers and adopters that are out there to embrace Web3. For sure.
Yeah, and maybe just one more point on that, because I think it's so critical what you just said in terms of brands. I always encourage brands to look at places like Africa and Asia and Latin America, particularly Brazil, or if you, let's say India, or if you look at the African continent, or even Saudi, right? I mean, look at those countries and look at their population. It's mostly younger population. And if you're not paying attention to those places, I think you're massively losing in the next 5 years, for sure. Because Europe is not making any more kids, right? Its population is falling off. Japan is doing the same. US also birth rates have fallen down, right? Not as European and the rest, but where is the growth going to come from is emerging markets. And I've spent 6+ years in these markets really early on. I think I was just early in my time, really banging the drum on emerging markets, but I think time is now. And I think you're absolutely right. Brands looking at those markets should say, wait a second, there's already fintechs there. There's technology, there's mobile phones. So how do we do this?
Right. Marc, any last final thoughts that you would like to share as well as we conclude our lovely chat here together?
Adding to what Maja just said, it's either about onboarding people in emerging markets or countries that don't have the access to technology that we have, that can unlock a lot of value for that part of the population. But it's also about next-gen consumers that grow up in those markets, in emerging markets like Maja just mentioned. And I think that's the key narrative and story for brands here that they need to understand, and corporates, is where are those consumers? How can we reach those consumers? And that should be our first priority. And then we think about the technologies, whether it's AI, whether it's blockchain, whether it's gaming, whether it's tokenization, whatever flows into that. But that should be the primary concern and primary objective for every brand.
Well, thank you both so much for your time, for your thoughts. Like I kind of shared at the beginning, I thought for sure, once my beloved banks proved me wrong yet again, that no, it's going to be the consumer-facing brands that are going to understand blockchain and come, and embrace this technology. While they have stumbled, it seems like some really good ones are working with you, or you're advising some very good ones, and how lucky they are. I'm very, very hopeful to see continued growth in this space, and very grateful that you're leading us in that space. So thank you both so much for being on the Metaverse Podcast today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.